Good evening, Mr. Goodman. Is that how I say your last name? Goodman?
That is.
Perfect. Welcome to Daydreams, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so let me hear a little bit about yourself. What do you do? Where are you from? I know you have a lot of interest with climate change and a lot of that's a really big topic, at least right now in 2021, as we try to push for a new green agenda. Um, what do you do? How did you get involved in this field? How did you come to become passionate about climate change?
Well, you asked where I'm from, so I'm a Wisconsin guy originally. Midwest represent. Did my undergrad out there at University of Wisconsin. Bit of a random chance. Kind of took a chemistry class in high school. Decided, I'll go with this, and then just kind of rolled with it the rest of my career. So
Okay.
after that, I moved across the country for the first time. Went out to Colorado, did my PhD. Um, did a bit of research with a little bit of solar cells that were kind of crappy and didn't really work that well, but that's research for you. Then I did a complete 180 career change, moved out to the East Coast. I'm out here over in the DC area now, and I've been working in the public policy government sector for about the past 5 years now.
So you've been working. You said you did a little bit of research with solar cells, with like solar
Mhm.
powered batteries. Is that what that is? Or
So basically, like different kinds of like your solar panels, you got your big silicon solar cells out front on a
right?
roof, the big black panels. So basically, different kinds of materials you could build those with.
Okay. And we have a couple people joining the audience. Hey, Jordan, good to see you again. So, what is the benefit of these solar cells? I mean, is there anything different between the ones you are creating versus, I guess the general solar cells or solar powered generators?
Well, our real goal was just to try to find, ways of either making them more efficient, better able to capture energy or, at least be able to do it a little more cheaply because they require a lot of energy. They can be a little expensive to make. So either impacting either of those two criteria was kind of the goal there.
Have you seen
And
what Elon Musk is doing with his battery technology, or I guess not him, but his team? Like what he's proposed with, he's trying to like. So a lot of the big issue with the Tesla cars and why people don't want to buy the electric cars is because they don't get a lot of mileage. And so
mhm.
they're trying to figure out, well, either one, you get more mileage out of the battery, or two, how can we supercharge this thing so it doesn't last on the charger for 30 minutes and then take you
Yeah.
30 minutes out of your day? Have you seen it at all? What he's doing with, what he's trying to do with the batteries over there?
Yeah. So it's funny, out here in the mall, there's actually a Tesla store that my wife and I popped into, and they offer like home battery solutions. So like you can have like the solar array on the roof, and then you actually have a giant battery pack inside the house that you could draw off of, in case you lose power. So it could be useful like that, but that's not the cutting edge technology you're talking about because it's still kind of the old style batteries where it takes a while to charge them. And yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how battery technology develops because that's going to be the major, I would say, stopping point for really getting electric cars out there for exactly the problems you just said.
So I'm stupid when it comes to batteries, to be honest. I'm completely ignorant. So solar, like, is there a different kind of like, what do solar batteries use that requires it to, I guess, um, be sun specific? Like, can I not just take any light and aim it at the sensor? Like, again, I'm stupid when it comes to batteries and like how power is generated. So like if I took a light bulb and I just aimed it at one of the solar generators, would it absorb the light and
Mhm.
give me electricity?
Yeah, it would. So all the photovoltaic cells that you use these days, they'll absorb, any kind of visible light that you see. They'll only capture about 22 to 24% of it. So if you were running a light bulb and then using the light bulb to power it, you'd eventually run out of energy. Um,
Okay, so that's what I was getting at, right? It's like, why can't we use this like this, I guess, cyclical cycle and just get infinite energy from it? Like, why do we not get infinite energy if we just take a phone, put it on a solar powered charger, and then aim its flashlight at it? to constantly get going battery? Like, is there a reason why we just lose battery charge?
Well, there's never a completely efficient process. So I think about it, in terms of whiskey making. So if you go into a distillery, they put the whiskey in these oak barrels, but they lose some of that alcohol over time just because it evaporates. They call it the angel share. So it's kind of a similar thing here. You have things in the mechanism of the solar cell that they're not able to capture all the light. Maybe they can't use it completely efficiently. So there's always going to be losses somewhere. It won't ever be 100% efficient.
Right. And we got a couple more people joining in the chat. What's up, Mason? Hey, Sammy, what's up? And then Chandler saying long time no see. What's up, buddy? So what is the importance of getting solar energy out there? Like, have you heard of what's the guy's name? He's a world-renowned scientist that talks about the different levels of civilization, and we're like a type 1 civilization right now.
Oh yeah.
You know who I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about. I just can't remember his name either.
Yeah. Michu something. I don't remember his last name, but he talks about the different types of civilizations and how the civilization you register on the list based off how you harness energy. And right now we're like a type 1 civilization, like using fossil fuels to basically power our planet. When we get to a type 2 civilization, that's when we'll be using like the renewable energies of the earth, the wind, solar power, water. How far off do you think we are from that?
Knock on wood, hopefully not too far off. It really depends on our decisions over the coming decades here, because either we do that switch, or things start to regress in a less than ideal way, I'll say, because climate change notwithstanding, we do have to do that transition because there's only so much coal, oil, and natural gas underground. And, even if we weren't warming the planet, we'd run out of those eventually. So there's a clock essentially to implement, renewable energy. But the thing is, we have the technology now to do it. That may not have been true 20 years ago, but we have all the tools we need to get it done right now.
Yeah. So you mentioned that one of the issues with fossil fuels is that we're running out. Like, there's a limited supply of it. There's not an unlimited supply like there is wind or solar.
Mm-hmm.
So I know like the base level of what's going on, I guess, with carbon emissions and going up into the atmosphere. Can you give me a overview of what's going on, I guess? Why it's so important to switch to renewable energy?
Yeah, sure. So the way I think about it, this is going to be kind of a tangential story, but I promise it goes somewhere.
Hey, all for it. Let's go.
So back in college, I lived in this high-rise apartment. I was on, I think, the 5th floor, and there were 10 floors above me. And one night, I started hearing some water flowing for some reason, and water started coming in my apartment because apparently some people, up on one of the top floors were throwing around a mattress, which I guess is something you do at midnight when you're in college, and they knocked a sprinkler head off the wall. So they were also like right above my apartment, but also right near the trash chute for the building. So the water just followed that down all the way down throughout the building. So it's the middle of the night, and people come into my apartment and they're trying to assess the damage. And they bring out a little tool. It's an infrared camera. So I don't know if you've ever gotten the chance to play with one of these, but they're pretty fun because you can just point it at something and it will be different colors depending on the temperature of whatever it is you're looking at.
Right.
So they were looking at the walls with that because where there's water, it's going to be cooler. And that's kind of a long-winded to say that, everything that's above absolute zero temperature, it emits some kind of radiation.
Right.
If we're around room temperature, it emits infrared radiation, which we see as heat with the thermal camera. So that energy that is constantly being emitted by all things, a lot of it from the surface of the Earth just goes right out into space. It leaves the atmosphere and it essentially cools the planet. So we have solar radiation coming in, providing us heat. A lot of it just goes out. But then we have these gases in the atmosphere, these greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, that absorb light at the same frequency that it's being radiated from the surface. So instead of that light being able to exit the atmosphere, go out into space, it just gets reflected back. So we get more heat to accumulate here. And that's really the basic physics behind, how climate change is happening. We have more of these gases up there, they reflect more of that energy back to us, and it starts to accumulate.
And what are the primary gases that are causing this?
So the big one is carbon dioxide, and that's really produced anytime you burn something. Your coal, your natural gas, your oil, you're putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that's like 75% of the problem. Then you have things like methane, which is basically natural gas. Some of it can leak out, get up in the atmosphere as well, and it has a larger global warming potential. So if you have one molecule of methane, it has the same effect as 34 molecules of carbon dioxide. So a little bit of that goes a long way. Then you have some other couple of minor ones, but they don't make up as nearly as large percentages.
Don't we all breathe out carbon dioxide as we exhale?
We do. We absolutely do. It's just that before we started burning fossil fuels, we were in equilibrium with nature because we breathe out CO2, algae, trees, grass, they all take it in and convert it back into oxygen as they feed themselves. So it was a balanced system until we started perturbing it with burning.
Well, not trying to sound old conspiratorial or anything, but didn't the population of humans just exponentially grow from like the 1900s until now? Like we went from like a couple million, like to like a couple billion people in the last 100 something so years. So, I mean, I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, but like, isn't just sheer numbers part of the problem? Like if everybody's like 30 something billion people are breathing out, I don't know the exact number of people that are on the earth. But if all those people are breathing out O2 every second, like literally I take a breath as soon as I want to catch my breath or say my next sentence, isn't that part of the problem?
I mean, it's a matter of degrees. So all the people exhaling on Earth would not match the daily emissions from like a power plant. So it's a way big.
Humans are the problem.
There's nowhere near enough of us to be competing with even a modest size like power plant in the United States. And just on a gross tonnage level, there are more. If you added up all the ants on Earth, they would weigh more than us. So they're already, putting these gases out more than we are already. So, yeah, that's not exactly a big issue right now, thankfully.
Thankfully, right? No, actually, it's like a double whammy, isn't it? Because we have these power plants that are emitting these O2 gases, and then on top of that, we're cutting down parts of the rainforest, like the Amazon, that are responsible for purifying the air and grabbing these O2 and again purifying it per se. And we've just kind of done ourselves a double whammy, it seems like, to where we've cut down a lot of these trees that are responsible for this process that keeps us in equilibrium, and then at the same time we're just releasing mass amounts. I mean, Daydreams promotes conspiracy. No, I promise. I love you, Dill. No. No, it's just fun to theorize some things, man. So, but going back to the rainforest or a lot of the issues with that, I mean, are we cutting it down at like an exponential rate? Like, is there anything we could do to like stop the O2 emissions? What can be done right now?
Well, the rainforest is a bit complicated because, I mean, we're in the United States. It's not exactly our territory to control.
Fair, yeah.
So
not particularly the rainforest, but at least on homeland soil, we're cutting down, trees in favor of parking lots and new facilities, luxurious facilities that we can live in. I mean, is there something that we could do that could minimize that?
Yeah, so I get into this a little bit in the book, and a lot of it comes down to changing land use. So you mentioned, building parking lots, building new housing developments. That's part of it, of course. It would be a lot better if we could rely on public transportation, higher density housing. That would be, really helpful. But a major thing we can do is change our agricultural land use. So right now we dedicate, I think it's about 93 million acres to growing corn every year. And about half of that is dedicated to just feeding like animals, cows, pigs, and chickens.
Mhm.
So we have all this land that is basically not taking up any carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, not really doing us any favors for climate change. But if we stopped consuming meat as much, now I'm not saying everyone needs to go vegan here. I
Right.
certainly can't and won't. But if we cut down so we have more of that land available to us to replant with grasses, trees, and all these other things, we can start to tip the balance that way.
Okay. And so the move to solar energy or renewable energy would also contribute for this, right?
Yeah, so it's like two parts of the equation. So over here you got we're pumping these gases up into the atmosphere. We have to stop doing that. And then we have to, on the other hand, take the ones out of the atmosphere that we've already put up there so we can get back to normal. So you got to get those hands shaking together. So putting in things like solar and wind, that'll help us stop putting more in the atmosphere. Changing our land
Gotcha.
use will take it out.
Gotcha. So it's, the world is heating up, as a lot of people would say. At what rate are we heating up?
So right now, I'm trying to remember the precise statistics from the latest IPCC
Right.
climate report. I think they've said over the last decade or two, we've gotten at least half a degree warmer on average across the world. And that's in Celsius. So that's about maybe 1 to 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit for all of our American friends.
That's a lot on average.
Yeah, and
That's
it's
I mean, that's a lot on my electricity bill on average if I'm going up, just a degree or two. I mean, just to have take that over, my bad. To have just an average of 1 to 2 degrees, you said Fahrenheit?
yeah. And hey, I'm in Virginia. I feel that. I feel that right with you.
Gosh. So, what would the effect of that be on our polar ice caps? I know that they're melting right now. I know that it's sort of what's happening over there.
Well, so it'll only make that go faster the hotter it gets.
Right.
And it's really interesting because that temperature increase isn't evenly distributed. So not all places will be exactly, 1 or 2 degrees hotter. And when you look at the Arctic and the Antarctic, they're actually heating up faster. So
So
they've actually had
it's like consolidating in one place, right?
well, it just is. So like in the summertime, the Arctic is like more pointed towards the sun. So like
Okay.
you have certain places on Earth where at certain times of the year the sun doesn't set. So which is an interesting cultural phenomenon for those places. But what happens is we've seen like 100-degree days in the Arctic, which just should not happen.
Really?
Yeah.
What is the average temperature in the Arctic? Like I thought it was like it never got above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Like
Yeah, well, it does melt to some degree every year. There's sea ice loss, but you push those temperatures up, and maybe you wind up with a winter where there just isn't any sea ice at all, which would be a tremendous change.
so, uh, I, I guess the response to that would be the oceans rising and then
Mhm.
slowly increasing the temperature or decreasing the temperature even more.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because in some places it would increase the temperature, in some places it wouldn't. So the ocean relies on currents. So, these water moving below the surface that circulates, around the world. And then you add in all the water that's trapped in the ice caps, that's fresh water. That dilutes the salt in the ocean enough where some of those currents stop. So the reason Europe has a temperate climate is because currents move warm water from the Caribbean around the equator up there, so it keeps them, relatively warm all year round. If those currents shut down, on average, Europe would get colder, whereas since they're not taking that heat up north, regions around the equator would get even warmer. So it's these odd little, effects that happen with climate change, that are all based on the world getting, warmer on average, but specific situations are going to be really different just based on where you live.
Wouldn't that have a dramatic effect on weather conditions?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because aren't we seeing a lot more monsoons happening, a lot more, hurricanes, especially during the
Hmm.
hurricane season, even off hurricane season? We're seeing a lot more. I think each year we keep hitting a new record, which is wild, especially in the Caribbean or down in the Gulf. Is that responsible? Is the sea level rising? Is that partially due, or is the I guess the record each year, particularly in response to the sea levels rising?
So it's not necessarily the sea levels rising, but it's the higher temperature because
Gotcha.
when air is warmer, it can hold on to more water. So then it can result in more rain. Um, so, like in Germany lately, they had those massive floods last month,
Right.
which is completely out of the ordinary. And if you look worldwide, rainfall has definitely increased and continues to increase. But again, not in all places. Some areas are getting drier, they suffer from persistent droughts. Others get more of these monsoon weathers. It's just, yeah, again, where you live.
Now, what about the people that say that this is a cycle? Like the Earth goes through cycles, and it's normal for the polar ice caps to melt. It's normal for these things to happen, or the Amazon rainforest to, you know, burn itself to cleanse some of the dead trees. Like, what do we say in response to those?
Yeah, so there is truth in that. So there are cycles that affect the climate. So remember we had an ice age 10,000 years ago where we had
Right.
glaciers basically a mile thick over a lot of North America. And that's the result of, the earth is on its axis, it tilts, sometimes it tilts a little bit closer to the sun on average, sometimes it tilts a little bit away. So there is that natural variation that changes the climate, except we're currently on a backswing on that cycle where things should be getting colder. There's also cycles with the sun. The sun doesn't provide a constant amount of output. Sometimes it's a little cooler, sometimes it's a little hotter, and that's also on a predictable cycle. But again, as far as recorded history, the sun's about as cool as it's ever been. So we don't have that influence as well. The only thing that really correlates with it is we're burning all these fossil fuels and adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And that's really the best evidence we have. These natural cycles exist, but based on what we know, we should be getting colder.
So I think I was reading somewhere that they were saying that, if this continues, we could potentially put ourselves in another ice age where the world, or I guess it like tries to overcorrect itself for the heat levels that are constantly rising, and the way that like you mentioned the current was working, like it would. Again, I'm stupid when it comes to all this, so I'm probably botching this whole thing. But the way I guess the currents work, like you said, since it dilutes the currents a little bit more, what would happen, like the currents would either change or completely disappear in certain areas, thus decreasing the temperature and then promoting a complete ice age. Is that too far off?
That's probably not going to happen because the
Okay.
global temperature will still be higher. When we had ice ages, that average was substantially lower compared to normal. So even with those currents changing, maybe you have colder winters or colder average temperatures in some part of the world, it's not going to lead to that ice age just because you can't accumulate the glaciers and the ice on the poles to move downward. It's still going to be too warm for that.
Now, how does this affect tectonic plates, and I guess how does this affect the constant, I guess, threat of earthquakes? Because it seems like those have kind of been on the rise and have been getting a little bit more harsher every year too.
That's pretty unrelated. So if
It
you think
is.
about like if you this goes back to in ninth grade when I made a model of the Earth out of cake. So all the things happening in the climate is like if you had a very very thin candy shell over like a giant wedding cake. It's happening in an incredibly small slice of the earth where all the tectonics, all the underground processes, that is way deeper down. That's completely insulated from our changes to the atmosphere.
Really? So even underground, we're not seeing the temperature changes. We're only seeing that above surface.
We are, well, it depends on how far down you go. So up in the Arctic with those very high temperatures, it is starting to get down deeper into the soil, and you're starting to melt the permafrost that's down there. It's causing a lot of problems for foundations in states like Alaska. People's houses tipping over because the ground is essentially melting beneath them.
Right.
But that only goes down, maybe 10 feet, 20 feet at the very most. Once you get below that point, temperature is basically constant for any time scale.
Really? I don't know. It's again, I'm stupid when it comes to all this stuff. So
no, you're asking great questions.
To me, it just, when a metal heats, right? This is, we see, the Eiffel Tower sort of expand a little bit in the summer because it heats up. So to me, to think that, if the world is constantly heating, we might get more expansion in tectonic plates, which would in turn cause them to shift a little bit more, which would kind of result in the earthquakes that we're kind of experiencing and the more harsh, how do they measure magnitudes? So I'm stupid, so I'm speculating here. Complete speculation.
I got you. No, because you're right. You heat something up, it tends to expand. The thing is that dirt is typically a really, really good insulator. So it basically blankets, beyond a certain level. It traps the heat, keeps heat from coming in. It basically acts like, a cooler or a blanket to maintain temperatures below a certain level. And it's not deep enough to really cause those kinds of, subterranean movements. The things that do, though, could be things like fracking, where you are, pulling this natural gas out of the earth by breaking apart, these geologic formations that are much deeper than the surface, which can cause all kinds of aftershocks and instabilities. And that's why you see a lot of that around like Oklahoma, the Plains states, where that kind of activity has become more common.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. So have you, again, this is going to be a weird question. Have you seen the movie Interstellar?
I have not.
It's a fantastic movie. It's with Matthew McConaughey, and towards the beginning of the movie, they're talking about how the Earth is heating up and how, they need to go terraform another planet, and that's how they set everything up. And then Matthew McConaughey gets in the spaceship, finds another planet and everything like that, starts terraforming. This might be your area of expertise or interest. Do you think we're far off from like terraforming another planet like Mars or anything like that? What would that take to do? I mean,
well, first we'd have to be able to travel to another planet that would be able to support us. So one of the big issues with even trying to visit Mars is that you're exposed to a lot more intense radiation than just going to the moon. So with that transit distance, you're putting your health in significant jeopardy just with the technology we have right now.
Gotcha.
And then you really need the right kind of planet to be able to do it. So I've always been kind of dubious about Mars being terraformed because it used to have, a similar atmosphere to ours. And then it just mostly blew away because its core cooled down and stopped spinning. So it didn't have the same kind of magnetic field protecting us like the Earth does. So even if you added more gas to try to heat it up, I don't know why it wouldn't just blow away again.
That's a good point. Okay. Because a lot of people just assume that it's the atmosphere and they don't really think about, the core of the planet. And that's a good point. Daydreams discovers the cause of earthquakes. No. No, sir. Everything can be boiled down to climate change. So we've talked a lot about climate change. We've talked a lot about the world heating up, what can be done about it. We've talked about the ice caps melting. We've talked about weather conditions Do you think that it will? What's our time frame? That's my question. What's our time frame? Like, what are we looking at? Like, how much time do we have before, if we don't do anything, worst case scenario, the whole thing goes to hell?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's tough because the IPCC report, they have multiple different scenarios where a lot of it is we have a lot of good data, we can kind of plan out where it's going to go, but even those models aren't entirely accurate because you're trying to model something that's as complicated as the Earth's atmosphere.
Right.
And what's interesting is that we've seen effects happen a lot sooner than we might have previously predicted. So that's kind of what's scary about it. And in terms of a timeline, if we do nothing, well, at least by the end of the century, things will pretty well collapse just because we won't be able to grow nearly enough food for our present population, at the very least. But then in terms of solving the problem, we basically only have like 10, 20 years to really do the majority of the work because it takes time to take those gases out of the atmosphere by planting trees and all those other mechanisms. So even if we stopped emitting today, we'd still have these effects for a while, which means we have a very limited time frame to really avoid the worst possible outcomes.
Right. We're on a time crunch. Like we literally have a deadline. It's coming up fast. We have a couple people in chat saying we need to terraform this planet. Gina, my mom, saying part of the reason the Earth is heating up is all the fracking in the ground, as you mentioned earlier, and added in nuclear waste that is stored in the ground, and you notice a rise. What is that? Yeah, and you will notice a rise. Gotcha. So we have a limited amount of time, and it's important that we focus on making sure that we have the right metrics to judge these things by. Have you heard of quantum computing?
Yes, I have.
Are you optimistic that it would give us a better prediction of the things to come? I know you said it was hard to measure or predict certain outcomes based off of the data that we have now, but it seems pretty, optimistic that quantum computing might actually, help with that.
Well, better computing will, of course, allow us better predictions, better models.
Right.
The issue is we know what's going to happen. We don't know precisely when it's going to happen, maybe plus or minus 5 to 10 years. But we know what's going to happen. We know what we need to do about it to avoid it. So, better models and better computing power are always better, but the real work is actually getting it done.
Right. So what can everybody do, individually to make sure that they do their part to not... this is going to sound really weird. It's going to sound really weird and people might judge me for this, but I don't know why, but I've always had a suspicion that water trapped in water bottles, plastic water bottles, don't escape and make it back into the atmosphere. So in turn, I make sure every water bottle that I have is unscrewed after I drink it, and whatever water droplets are contained in that water bottle can easily evaporate back into the atmosphere. Now, I know that sounds like probably the most minimalistic thing someone can do, but I promise you, I don't know why I do it. For me, I just have a gut feeling that it just doesn't return to the atmosphere, and that's part of the problem. I want to make sure like all the water returns up into the atmosphere. You don't want to have water sitting in a tank that hasn't been evaporated in like 50 years or something like that. And the atmosphere needs water. So again, this is probably the stupidest thing I could possibly do, but I don't know. Maybe.
Well, by unscrewing those, you might be decreasing the volume of your trash a little bit, because when that water bottle winds up in a dump, that water might heat up, and that increase in pressure might make the bottle expand a little bit to take up a little more room in the dump. But overall, I wouldn't feel too guilty about not doing that.
I know. I just every now and then I'll see like water bottles like halfway full, but they're thrown out and they've just been sitting there for like a week, and I'm like, well, that water that could have returned to the atmosphere. You know, you're part of the problem. So obviously it's not that I guess extenuous, but still it's just always something that I've done just because I don't know, thought it was something interesting, I guess.
Well, and you raise the question of what can people do, and as you just demonstrated, people do want to be part of the solution. They want to contribute to solving the problem, making things better, and they generally want to know what they can do about it. But the problem is that a lot of that boils down to your choice of consumption. Did you bring your own bag to the grocery store or not? Did you buy the free range organic eggs, or did you buy the standard eggs? But the fact is, a lot of those personal choices don't really matter a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. You could be the perfect consumer and perfect handler of waste and trash and minimize all those things, and it won't equal a fraction of an hour's worth of climate change emissions coming from the power plant down the street.
Right.
So what is required is really a societal level response, and part of that begins on the individual level, realizing that, hey, this isn't just down to me, it isn't just down to individuals, it's about all of us acting together. And so really the conclusion I come to in the book is that you got to be motivated enough to really manifest that will, if you will, in the form of the political arena, influencing the kind of policies that can have a systemic change, and being willing to put pressure on the system to have those larger effects that do then add up to a major solution to the problem.
Do you think companies like Tesla are part of the solution? Well, if or do you think that they're doing the right thing in pushing for electronic cars?
Yeah, absolutely. That has to be part of it. And I think, the existence of Tesla has had a good effect on that, because you look back when the company started 10, 15 years ago, electric cars weren't a thing. But then they carved out this niche in the market, made it attractive, introduced it to the general public. And now you have the big companies, GM, Ford, saying, after 2030 or whatever, we're only going to make electric vehicles. So that was able to get the ball rolling on, essentially decarbonizing a critical industry.
So do you think the evolution of technology or the progression of technology might, be able to reverse some of these effects? Like, for example, we've already seen where technology can be implemented, I guess, in the automotive industry with reducing carbon emissions with vehicles. What about other industries? Do you think technology is, I guess, at the forefront of being able to reduce this? Do we need technology right now to really reduce the emissions, or